Okay, so today we're just going to start the very surface of slope notes. We'll get into slope more in depth next week. But like I said, I just want to touch the surface of what slope is. So when I think of slope, I think of kind of like a skier. So I think of mountains, and that always determines the slope for me. So with that said, we need to identify what slope tells us. So slope tells us two different things. So what do you think slope tells us? Think about it. Think of it like as a mountain. It tells us what?
Positive charge or negative charge.
Not charge.
Positive something.
Okay, so it tells us how, you're kind of right there. So it's going to tell us good, how steep the line is. So it's going to tell us how steep the line is. So once it tells us how steep the line is, it also tells us one more thing. You might have seen it already it tells us the direction that the line goes. So it tells us which direction the line goes. So we have our lines here. Now, you don't have these on your notes. However, I highly recommend that you at least write 4 of these different lines into your notes because it's going to be helpful in the long run. So when we're talking about which direction the line goes, we have 4 different terms that we're going to apply to it. So if you look at this first line here on the left, it goes from bottom to top. Now, I always kind of look at things as, to me, a workout. So if I'm a skier and I'm at the bottom of this line and I have to climb from the bottom of this line all the way to the top, what kind of workout am I going to get? Am I going to get a good workout?
Yeah.
So that's going to be a positive workout. So when it goes up, it's going to be a positive line. So if I were you guys, on my paper, I would write an example of what a positive line looks like. So then, if I come to this line and I'm the skier, and I go, and I always look at my lines from left to right, just like I read, and I'm a skier and I'm starting at my left, and I go down to my right, am I going to be climbing that slope? No, I'm going to be going downhill. So am I going to get a good workout if I'm just standing here and going downhill and the momentum's moving me?
No.
No. So that type of line is going to be negative.
Then you have neutral line.
Not neutral. That's not one of the terms. Bless you.
Like the one that's right there.
We're going to talk about that right now. So now we come to this line here. If I start from my left and I go to my right and I'm a skier and I'm standing on that slope, on that line, and it just goes from left to right, kind of like an x-axis, what am I going to do? So I'm here. Am I going to move?
Yeah.
Nah. I'm not going to get any kind of workout, am I? I'm just going to sit here because it has no slope. It is a straight, flat surface. So this slope is going to be 0. So again, I draw those little example lines and I write that down because you will want that. Okay. So then if we look at this next line here, I always go from left to right. So I start at my left and I go down to my right. What kind of slope is this going to be?
Double negative.
Well, not double negative, just a straight up negative. So we already have 3 terms, positive, negative, 0. We have one more term that we're going to identify, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. So since this slope's going down, it's going to be a negative. I come to my next line. Here, I go from left to right. What kind of slope is that going to be?
Where? Which one?
It's going to be a positive. Oops, excuse me. So this line right here, let me get it back. My arrow, where'd it go? Because you're going from bottom to top. It's a very slight slope, but you're still going from left to right. The left is down at the bottom, so it's going to be a positive. Then you go to your final one. Here, again, you go from left to right. It's going in an upward motion. So what kind of slope is that going to be? A positive. Now, the one that I did not put on there, that should be, making sure I have enough room somewhere. I don't draw the straightest.
Go straight up.
So this line goes straight up and down. If I'm a skier on the line I just drew at the very top here, and it goes straight down, and I try to ski that, what's going to happen to me?
You die.
Yeah, I'm going to die. So what kind of slope is that going to be? It's a death one, or I'm going to become undefined and no longer in existence. So undefined. So in your homework assignment today, you will have a slope that you'll have to identify as 0, and you'll have a slope that you'll have to identify as undefined.
Can we just do that? Can we just get a whole paper and do that?
Well, we're gonna build upon it. We're gonna make it a little bit harder than just identifying what kind of slope they are.
Let's make that the first thing to do.
Okay, so let's look at the next part.
No, she don't.
So again, what kind of line is this?
That's a 0.
That's a 0. Good. The one that goes straight up and down, what kind of line is that? Straight up and undefined. So think again. You're a skier. It's a trick question. So if you're a skier and you go on this straight line that goes from left to right, that's a horizontal line, you're not going anywhere. So it's 0. Again, you're a skier, you're at the top of this slope, and you try to ski down it, you're going to fall off and you're going to perish. You're going to be undefined. You're no longer existing. Okay, so watch. Doesn't go anywhere. So, slope formula. So there's going to be 2 slope formulas that we're going to talk about. The first slope formula, so on your paper, underneath the slope formula, slope equals rise over run. So when I talk about rise over run, rise, you're either going to count up, which will be positive. So rise, you count up, which is going to be a positive number, or you count down. If you count down, it's going to be a negative number. So your rise is basically going to be on that Y. It runs up and down like your Y-axis. It won't be on the Y-axis, but it runs vertical. So your rise, you'll go up or you'll count down. You always find your rise first. So I'd even put a number 1 by your rise, like that. So you always, when you go to determine slope, you always find your rise first. Then we're going to determine, second part, our run. Now, if rise is up or down, what do you think run's going to be?
Left to right.
Left to right. But how I'm going to show you guys to do it, run is always going to be to our right. So we don't have to work with more negatives. You could go left or right, but if you find your rise first, you won't need to. So if you go to your right, just like on a number line, if you go to your right, your run will be a what type of number? Positive. Okay. So then our next part. So this is our coordinate plane with a line on it that has a what type of slope? Positive slope. Our job is going to be to identify what the slope is. So n equals rise over run. But before we can do that, we need to talk about a lattice point. We haven't talked about lattice points before. So a lattice point is where a line goes through a blank and a blank grid line. So if we're going up and we're going over, so if we're doing rise and we're doing run, we have to identify these lattice points. Which way do our grid lines run? So our grid lines are all these lines that go this way and then left to right. So which way do our grid lines run? Up and down, which means? Up and down means? Vertical. And then, so lattice points is where a line goes through a vertical and a horizontal grid line. So it's right where that line intersects the very corner of the grid line. So if we look at my chart here, I'm going to look where that line goes right in the corner of my horizontal and vertical lines intersect. So this would be an example of a lattice point. Would this here be an example of a lattice point? No, why not?
Because it's not at the arrow.
Well, it's not at the arrow, but it's not in the corner of where that horizontal and that vertical grid line cross, so that's not a lattice point. Would this be a lattice point?
Yeah.
Yes, it's right in the corner of where, or it's right where that line intersects the horizontal and vertical grid line. So a line will have multiple lattice points. So inside, here's another one,
There's another.
and another one, and another one. Okay? So a grid line is going to have multiple lattice points. I apologize you feel that way. So from here, you're going to use these lattice points to identify your slope. You can make it easy on yourself and use lattice points that are closer together, or you can make it more difficult on yourself and find lattice points that are further apart. Now, I'm going to show you the way that I would prefer you not to do it, because you'll make it harder on yourself. You don't have to write this down yet. So I'm going to find the slope. So anytime we talk about slope, the variable we're going to use is m. So anytime you see m in this unit, it stands for slope. So remember, slope is rise over run, right? You don't have to write this part down. So I look at my graph like I'm reading. I go from left to right. I find my first lattice point. Going left to right, it's going to be right here. I'm going to find my rise. So that means I'm going to have to go straight up until I get to a lattice point. I'm going to use a lattice point up here. I don't have to. I could use this one. But I'm going to use one that's further away. So I'm going to count.
So you use anyone?
But I'll show you why you don't want to just pick any one in just a second. So I'm going to count up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So how many spots did I go up? So my rise is 6. Now I have to count over to my run to get to my next lattice point. So I'm going to count over 1, 2, 3. So my run is 3. So my rise is 6 over 3. Now, this is a fraction, right? Why aren't fractions fun? They get harder. You have to simplify them. So if I use lattice points that are further away from each other, I'm going to have to simplify. So what's 6 over 3 simplified? What is it both divisible by? 3. So 6 divided by 3 is? 3 divided by 3 is? Okay, so the slope of that line is 2 over 1. However, I need to find a brighter color. Let's make it easier on ourselves. To make it easier on yourself, pick the 2 lattice points that are closest together. So again, I go from left to right, finding my first lattice point, which is right here, and then I first find my run. I always find my run first. So I'm going to count up 1, 2. So I'm going to have to count up 2 to my first lattice point I see, and then I'm going to count over my run 1 to my next lattice point. So what's my slope? 2 over 1. Did I have to simplify there? No. So I got to skip this extra step here. So you always want to pick lattice points that are closest together so you don't have to simplify. It just makes it easier for yourself.
Wait, so which one you do first?
You can do,
Rise first, then you got
you
the
always do your rise first, so you always count up or down. Now think about it. If you're counting up, it's going to have a positive slope. But if our line went the other way and it went down, it's going to have a negative. So then our rise would be negative. And we'll have a couple examples on your paper there. Okay, so let's get to the point where you guys start writing. So we did that. We did all that.
We did.
We did. Okay. Example number 1. Finding slope on a graph. So, before you can determine slope, you need to go through and draw your lattice points. You can choose to draw a lattice point on every single lattice point on your line, or you can find the first 2 lattice points going from left to right and just use those. I'll leave it to you. So remember, lattice points is where those vertical and horizontal grid lines intersect, and that's right where the line goes through. So here's a lattice point I'm going to use. And then I look at my grid lines, and I'm going to go to my very next lattice point. So I'm choosing to go ahead and put all my lattice points in. Again, you don't have to. You can use just the two closest. Now, I'm ready to determine what my slope is. So underneath, or right next to example number 1, or right underneath example number 1, you guys are going to put m equals, because remember we're talking about slope, so m equals, until you get in the habit, I would go ahead and put rise over run equals, okay, so we look at our first lattice point here. Well, my arrow's not coming up there. So we're going to look at my first lattice point. It's down at the bottom. I always look at my first lattice point by going left to right. If I go left to right, right here's my first lattice point. My rise, am I going to have to count up to get to my next lattice point or down? Up. So I'm going to count up how many spots?
2.
So my rise is going to be 2. And then I'm going to count over 1 for my run. So what's my run? 2 over 1. So my slope is 2 over 1. So that's your answer. So I'm going to box it. So I'm going to box. Because if you have to simplify, I need to know where your final answer is. Now let's say here, I used my first lattice point and I counted up 1, 2, 3, 4 as my rise, 1, 2 as my run. So again, I'm going to have 4, you don't have to write what I'm writing in pink. So my slope's going to be 4 over 2, but I'm going to have to simplify that to be 2 over 1. So again, you probably want to do what I have in the red. It's closer, it's easier, it's less work. If you mess up and don't use the closest, though, you just have to simplify. Okay, let's take a look at example number 2. So first thing that you're going to do for example number 2 is find your 2 closest lattice points going from left to right. So you start at your coordinate plane. You scan, you start at your left, and start finding your lattice points.
What the heck? You motherfucker, they got 2 on 1.
It's the line in the middle.
Oh.
Okay. So if I'm finding slope, I'm going to put m equals. Now rise over run. So if I find my first lattice point here at the bottom left, I'm going to find my rise first. So am I going to count up to the next lattice point or down? So I'm going to count up. 1, 2, 3. So my rise is going to be 3. And then my run, I count. How far do I count over for my run? 1.
I thought we had to use the one that said at the very bottom.
I did. Oh, shoot. I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so, no. That's a very good point. I thought we had to use the one. It's still the same. The reason why I tell you to use the one at the bottom, so you don't skip more. So, again, 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. What do you think the next lattice point's going to be? How many grid lines up? 1, 2, 3. How many runs over? 1. What's the next one going to be?
1.
So the whole slope of the line will be 3 over 1, 3 over 1, 3 over 1. So if I gave you guys a big coordinate plane and I said continue graphing this line, you could do that by using your slope. That's going to build onto the lesson you guys are going to do next week. I'm going to give you a slope formula, and with that formula, you'll graph your line. Okay, let's look at example number 3 now. What kind of line is this going to be?
Negative.
A negative. Good. I'm going to start at my top. I'm going to go down. So because it's a negative line, what kind of rise am I going to have?
Negative.
A negative. So find your lattice points. Okay. So slope is m equals rise over run. I'm going to go to my, you could pick any lattice point, but I always like to start at my far left. So I'm going to go to the first lattice point I come, going from left to right. It's right here. Now am I going to have to count up or down to my next lattice point? Down. So how many am I counting down? 2. Because I counted down, it's going to be a what type of number?
Negative.
-2. Then my run, how far am I counting over for my run?
2, 3.
3. So what's my run?
-3.
Nope, not negative. It's a positive 3. So it's just negative 2 over 3. Now, the only time your run would be negative is if you're going to the left, just like a number line.
Oh, I'm tripping.
Okay? Okay, let's take a look at example number 4. So, slope, so I'm going to put m equals. On your worksheet, if you just put what the slope is and you don't have that m equals in front of it, it'll be incorrect. It'll be wrong.
What?
So get in the habit of putting m equals. First thing I do, I find my lattice points. What kind of slope does this line here have? Positive. Good. So I'm going to find my rise first. So I come to my first lattice point, and my rise, I'm going to count up how far? I'm going to count up 1. So my rise is going to be 1. Then what's my run going to be? My run's going to be, thank you, 3. So my slope is 1 over 3. Rise over run.
Yeah, I'm a little confused.
Hit okay. There's Hannah's schedule. Hit back to the PowerPoint. Or not Hannah, Savannah. No, over 4.43, right there. Okay, and then hit present. Over to the right by Mr. There you go. Okay, so we're gonna, do me a favor, cross out example number 5 and example number 6.
Why?
I don't like those examples. I don't like how it's explained. When I give you an example like this, we're not going to use the slope formula in that way. I don't like that it doesn't have grid lines or anything like that. So that's where we're going to stop. But you guys said there was some confusion, so I want to go over some worksheet problems with you to help.